Madame de Brinvilliers was a French aristocrat who seemingly had everything: wealth, status, and a loving family. But then in 1670, her otherwise healthy brothers mysteriously died, and it was later discovered that she was the culprit. But why would she do this? And how did a once respected figure in Paris become one of history's most infamous poisoners? Join me to find out. The woman who has become notorious for poisoning her father and brothers in 17th century France was born as Marie Madeleine d'Aubray on the 22nd of July 1630. She was born into a wealthy French family, being the daughter of Antoine d'Aubray, an individual who held multiple offices within the French government and the administration of the capital of Paris. Foremost amongst these was a position as a Councillor of State, the equivalent of a modern-day cabinet minister, and the Master of Requests, a position which had a large amount of control over access to the French court and was consequently financially lucrative. Bribes and other payments being a regular feature of such positions in early modern Europe. As a result, Marie Madeleine's father was wealthy, and she was his eldest child, but not a male, a circumstance which precluded her at the time from inheriting the bulk of his vast estate when he died. The chain of events which led to Brinvilliers to murder her father and brothers might be said to have begun as far back as 1651, when Marie Madeleine was 21 years of age. At this time, she was married to Antoine Gobelin, Baron de Noailles, a wealthy minor French noble at the time. Gobelin had inherited extensive wealth through his family, which had run a famous tapestry workshop through successive generations, but Antoine himself was somewhat dissolute. He was made a marquis shortly after his marriage to Marie Madeleine, the Marquise de Brinvilliers, thus making his wife the Marquise de Brinvilliers. But elsewhere, his life was chaotic. In particular, he was an inveterate gambler. For that reason, not only had he squandered his inherited wealth, but also the dowry of 200,000 livres which he had acquired from Antoine d'Aubray in 1651 through his marriage to Marie Madeleine, and by the 1660s he was actually in considerable debt. These financial woes were reflected in their marital relations. Marie Madeleine and her husband had something of an open marriage. In particular, the Marquise was involved in a long-running affair with an officer by the name of Gaudin Sainte-Croix, an individual she had ironically enough been introduced to by her husband. Thus, although de Brinvilliers and her husband had 7 children, it is widely suspected that at least 3 of these, if not more, were actually the illegitimate product of the Marquise's affair with Sainte-Croix and others. The Marquise's father had learned about these developments by the early 1660s. His daughter's affair with Sainte-Croix especially troubled him, having a potential to ruin the family's reputation if it became well known within Parisian high society. It was in an effort to end it that Antoine d'Aubray obtained a letter from the king Louis XIV ordering the arrest of Sainte-Croix of some spurious charges. He would serve a considerable sentence at the Bastille prison in Paris in the mid-1660s. d'Aubray's actions infuriated de Brinvilliers, compounding an already toxic situation. Accordingly, by 1663, a set of circumstances had developed, which led to the Marquise's crime several years later, being her lover's incarceration at her father's behest, and the downward spiralling economic situation which the de Brinvilliers found themselves in owing to the Marquis's gambling problems. All of these would eventually lead to the plot which the Marquise concocted in the years ahead. It was during the mid-1660s that the Brinvilliers developed the idea of poisoning her father and siblings in order to acquire the family's vast wealth. Various theories about this period have been promoted. One is that Sainte Croix came into contact with several individuals who were skilled at the art of poisoning while he was serving his sentence at the Bastille. Another is that the Marquise began testing various different poisons on sick patients at France's hospitals, or even that she tested the poisons on her household servants. As a result, it has been speculated that the Marquise might have been responsible for killing as many as 30 people in all. However, there is little concrete evidence to suggest that she actually did go about this activity, and it would have aroused considerably more suspicions at the time if her own household servants had been regularly falling ill. What is clear is that with the aid of Sainte Croix, who had served his prison spell, the Marquise began poisoning her father in 1666. She was a regular guest at his household and was quickly able to administer an arsenic-based poison, disguised within his food and drink. He eventually died on the 10th of September 1666, and an investigation concluded that he had simply died of natural causes. No autopsy was performed, but given that her brothers would now inherit the bulk of their father's estate, she quickly determined to poison them too. This was a more complex matter. De Brinvilliers' father had been aging, and as a supposedly doting daughter, it was easy for her to get access to his food and administer the poison, but not so with her brothers. Consequently, she elected to hire a man named Jean Amelin, more commonly known as La Chasseur, to work in the family home and administer poison as opportunities to do so presented themselves. This was a tricky matter, and it was not until September 1670 that both brothers were dead, the first Antoine having been killed in June 1670. A more comprehensive investigation than had occurred in 1666 was now undertaken by the medical and civil authorities. The death of her father, a relatively old man, had quickly been dismissed as a natural occurrence. But the passing of the two Marquises' brothers, both young, otherwise healthy men, and within just weeks of each other, aroused considerable suspicions. Many individuals suspected foul play, but nothing sinister was comprehensively uncovered, and no charges were brought at this time. Well, there was nothing discovered which linked the deaths of the brothers to their sister. Hence, for some time it appeared that de Brinvilliers' plan had worked. She was soon enjoying newfound wealth and had gotten away with her crimes. That is, at least until 1672. That year, her lover and co-conspirator, Sainte Croix, died, perhaps from an illness, though it has been speculated that he accidentally poisoned himself. Whatever led to his demise, it must have been a sudden death, as Sainte Croix had not removed a large amount of self-incriminating evidence from his residence, a development which now had fatal consequences for de Brinvilliers. When the Parisian police undertook an investigation, they quickly discovered a chest in Sainte Croix's apartments, which contained a series of incriminating evidence. These included samples of the poisons he and the Marquise had used over the years, and also a number of letters between the two, which did not openly state their crimes, but provided enough grounds for considerable suspicion to be raised. An investigation was now reopened into the deaths of the Marquise's father and her two brothers. The Marquise fled Paris when she learned what had been found. If this were not unequivocal enough confirmation of her guilt, further damning evidence was provided in early 1673. At that time, La Chasseur was apprehended and, after extensive questioning, laid out the entire details of what had taken place, including his own role in the poisoning of the two d'Aubray brothers. Poisoning was considered a particularly heinous crime in the early modern period. For instance, a cook who was suspected of having been involved in a poisoning intent was punishable to death by being boiled alive. La Chaussee's end was not this bleak, but he was tortured before being executed on the 24th of March 1673. When her crimes were discovered, de Brinvilliers fled from France in 1673. She spent the next 3 years on the run, though surprisingly, she did not venture widely away from France, first taking refuge across the Channel in England, and even more surprisingly, living in exile just over the northeastern border of France, in the region approximating to modern-day Belgium, but which was then part of the Spanish Empire. It was here in the town of Liège that she was finally apprehended in 1676 and extradited to France. The Marquise had been found guilty of her crimes in absentia, following her flight from France in 1673, but a new trial was nevertheless held. This was effectively a show trial. There is little doubt of that, but de Brinvilliers was not inclined to cooperate. At first, she outright denied any and all involvement in the poisoning of her father and siblings, despite considerable evidence being presented and witnesses called, which left little doubt about her guilt. Faced with the Marquise's unwillingness to admit her guilt, the authorities eventually decided that she should be tortured. De Brinvilliers' final hours were unpleasant. The method of torture she was sentenced to have carried out on her was the water cure. This involves having the mouth forced open or held open using a wedge or some other device. Copious amounts of water are then poured relentlessly into the victim's mouth, resulting in gastric distension, drowning, and even death if the cure is applied for long enough. It has been used for centuries as a torture method, and is related to the modern-day practice of waterboarding. On the 16th of July 1676, faced with the prospect of her torture, de Brinvilliers confessed to her crimes, but was nevertheless put through the water cure for 4 hours to determine if there were further crimes or plots which the authorities were unaware of. However, this revealed little of any real substance. She was then taken to the Place de Grève, a regular site of public executions in early modern Paris, and the site of the Place de l'Hôtel de Ville in the French capital today. Here the Marquise de Brinvilliers was executed on the 16th of July by having her head cut off with a sword. Her body was then burned. De Brinvilliers' death ushered in a period in French social and political history which has become known as the Affair of the Poisons. This commenced following her execution and continued through for 6 more years until 1682. The Affair of the Poisons arose largely out of an increasing paranoia amongst the Parisian aristocracy and elite about other possible attempts to poison or otherwise kill individuals involved in succession disputes. The French King Louis XIV was particularly perturbed by this. Numerous further trials of individuals followed, often on dubious grounds, while the police and security forces of the French capital began rounding up fortune tellers, alchemists, and others who might be suspected of producing poisons. Others implicated or accused included high-ranking members of the French aristocracy, such as Olympia Mancini, the Countess of Soissons, who was eventually exiled from France as a result, though not executed. The Affair of the Poisons eventually resulted in the execution of 36 individuals before it ended in 1682, while a further 23 people were exiled from France. At one point, hundreds of individuals were under suspicion or had warrants for their arrest issued. Hence, the actions of Madame de Brinvilliers created a major controversy within French society, which had a bearing far beyond her own deeds. Perhaps unsurprisingly, given how much the incident dominated French high society in the 1670s and into the early 1680s. De Brinvilliers' actions have been memorialised in several forms, particularly during the 19th and early 20th centuries, when Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Alexandre Dumas both composed works based on her life and crimes. Thank you so much everyone for watching this video on Madame de Brinvilliers. I hope you found it interesting. Let me know what you thought of her life down below in the comments, and if you want more videos like this or from this time period, also let me know down below in the comments. I hope you guys are subscribed and the notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.